male white cast. One of them was Andrew Johnson, who's here. Let's have a round of applause. So we got a few nerds on there, haven't we? So here's one of them. Gary McKinnon. I'm sure you all know who Gary McKinnon is. He's the computer hacker who allegedly accessed computer systems at NASA, the Pentagon, and the US Navy, and came up with information about a secret space program and that kind of thing. Now, after this program went on TV, something happened which had never happened before for me at Rich Planet. This story, or the video, was picked up by mainstream media. So the actual YouTube video from Rich Planet's site was featured on, I think it was the Express website, the Daily Express, and the Metro newspaper, and various other mainstream newspapers, and they wrote fairly serious articles about this story. There were one or two minor points that they got wrong, but it was a serious article that they'd written. And because of that, this video is now got approaching 500,000 views, which is much higher than the average Rich Planet program, maybe 10,000, something like that. And that really got me thinking, because that's never happened before. Never. You think of all of the material on Rich Planet, such as Where Did the Towers Go, all of those interviews with Dr. Judy Wood, why aren't they picking that much more important research up and putting that in the Daily Express? What is it about this story that made them pick that one? Now, someone emailed me and said, after the interview went out, they said, well, I actually think that the NSA, the National Security Agency, deliberately made certain IP ranges within NASA, the Pentagon, and what have you, penetrable. They deliberately lowered the security on certain systems in order to make this happen, so that they could then arrest one person and make them into some sort of computer hacker role model in order to promote the whole idea of computer hacking on a worldwide basis. Now, I think that's possible. I don't know that it's true, but I think it could be. Now, that's not to say that Gary McKinnon isn't honest and didn't do exactly what he said he did, because I think he did. But I think he might have been used, because why would mainstream be picking up this story? It doesn't seem to add up to me. And if you look at the rhetoric now in the media about computer hacking, about how computer hackers from ISIS are going to get on the internet and make nuclear power stations blow up and all this crap, they've clearly created some sort of psychology about possibly the next terror threat, computer hacking, or the next fabricated terror threat. So was Gary McKinnon being used? I'm not saying that as a fact, I just think it is possible. All right, now as I said, I've had a lot of difficulty getting certain programs onto TV, and they will not touch the Madeleine McCann programs, even though they are 100% factual. And I'm just going to illustrate to you how difficult it's been for me to get my programs on television, because I really have had to water them down and miss out certain content. Not for the internet, but for the TV program. So here's a typical comment from the TV company in an email. Episode 6 also has recorded phone call conversations. I think we've been down this road before. Can you provide evidence that they give you permission to record these, please? So these were phone calls that I'd made to the police and the National Farmers Union because I was investigating animal rustling. And the phone calls demonstrated incompetence of the police without question. So I was exposing incompetence in public bodies such as the police and the National Farmers Union. But according to the TV company, I'm not allowed to put those recorded phone calls on television. They said, well, I said to them, well, look, BBC and Channel 4 do this kind of thing all the time. They said, well, Channel 4 and the BBC have a few more lawyers than we do, so it's up to them if they want to break the law, not under our license, I'm afraid. So I then had to completely re-edit those shows and take all those phone calls out, even though it was in the public interest. Here's another comment from the TV company. My colleague has viewed your revised edit of episode 5, and I'm disappointed to discover you're still trying to push the boundaries and jeopardize us facing a possible complaint. I am unhappy with your comment against the BBC presenters of The One Show. Did you really need to make that remark to create people with heads full of shit? So, I just said that the mainstream was creating people with heads full of shit, and I flashed this image up. This was a major, major problem for the TV company. And this triggered them saying that I now need to have my own broadcast license. So they said this could be seen as a personal attack. We have a lot of traffic, so they're admitting that Rich Planet is getting more viewers, right? We have a lot of traffic, and I seriously don't have the time to keep going backwards and forwards with you on compliance issues which slow our operations down. If you want to broadcast this kind of work, then you need to do so under your own broadcast license. So I just thought this was quite innocuous, just putting a picture up like that. Think of the comments that come out on Have I Got News For You and programs like that. They're always slagging each other off, but I'm not allowed to do it, especially against the BBC. So then the chief executive of the TV company steps in. If the BBC or any of the presenters of the One Show was to start a fairness and privacy complaint, it could land us with the worst possible form of Ofcom investigation, even more so with the BBC potentially involved. We'd be faced with a massive diversion of resources in handling an investigation, which we just can't spare. On top of that, Ofcom have been very litigious of late and almost always pick on smaller channels where they can have easy wins dumping their own in-house lawyers on the case. So that's what happens. They get easy wins against smaller channels, and that's why I've had so many problems. Had to make many, many edits and changes to the programs to get the last 12 programs on TV. And now they're saying I've got to have my own broadcast license, which is £2,500 plus £1,000 a year on top of that, plus £600 per episode that I pay to get the programs on TV.
Scandalous.
So he's saying here, it's time for us to insist that you get your own broadcast license. So what that does is, if there is a complaint, the complaint comes to me. The TV company aren't affected by the complaint. Did you bring your Union Jacks? Get them out. Come on, it's Tim Peake. Hooray!
Here we go.
Get them out. Wave the Union Jacks, because Tim Peake is on the International Space Station. Here's Tim Peake giving a message to the Queen. Here's Tim Peake launching the start of the Six Nations Rugby. If only we had such clear video images in Apollo 11, we might know what the fuck happened, might we? Hooray! It's Tim Peake, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Next week, Tim Peake is going to be reading the news, followed by Celebrity MasterChef starring Tim Peake, and Dancing on Shite on the International Space Station with grinning like a Cheshire cat, Tim Peake. What's going on with this Tim Peake? It's clear propaganda in my opinion. Some people might call it PR, but he's been all over the front pages. Everyone knows who he is. What's it all about? Well, we can hazard a guess. My guess is that it's to do with NASA and the growing number of people who don't trust NASA and think NASA may have lied about the moon landings. So I think this is a PR stunt in order to massage people's beliefs as to space and their endeavours in space. But let's remind ourselves that the International Space Station is only 400 kilometres above the Earth, where Tim Peake is. The moon is 363,000 kilometres away. So if we were to enlighten the distance between the Earth and the moon as Derby to London, Tim Peake's probably just at the end of the lawn there, right? He's gone about 150 yards. All right, so he's not really that far into space, is he? Now, we spoke about this on Rich Planet with guest Carl James. And I do find that the moon landing subject is very good for starting fights. People really, they get really passionate about it. Now, Carl James spoke about Stanley Kubrick, and we did a whole show covering the theory that Stanley Kubrick's filming techniques were used to provide the film footage for the faked moon landings. And the more you look into this, the more plausible it seems to get. Stanley Kubrick used this front projection system which allowed him to create what looked like outdoor sets filmed indoors in films like Space Odyssey 2001. Now, in the interview that I did with Carl James, we spoke about this guy, Bill Casing, who was a technical author in the space industry, worked on various rockets that were in NASA technology. And he wrote the book, he's a whistleblower, he wrote the book, We Never Went to the Moon. and he was one of the first persons to talk about the fact that he thought that Stanley Kubrick was involved in faking the moon landings. Now, when I put this program out, I was contacted by an American researcher who watched the interview with Carl James about Stanley Kubrick and the alleged fake moon landings, and he gave me some new information. Now, this information, Carl James, who's a moon hoax researcher, didn't know about it.